Sonic Advance 1 saw the long-awaited return of the old-school gameplay that made the Hedgehog a superstar, but it was held back by a few too many rough edges. But a follow-up to a good game is so often just what it takes to achieve a great one, and the team at Dimps would be granted that opportunity. On the 9th of March, 2003, the sequel took its shot! Sonic Advance 2. And I didn't get it. What happened? I mean, I bought an entire GBA for the first game, and even though I'd had a great time with it, I skipped out on the sequel? Why? Well, it was because of something that colored my experience with this handheld throughout most of its life. So, I had gotten a GameCube for my 14th birthday, but from that day forward, for the next 7 months, I wouldn't be able to get anything else gaming related. I was too old and too apathetic about school to get games as a reward for good grades. But I was still way too young to buy them myself. So on that rare occasion that I actually could pick out a new game, what was I gonna choose? A cutting-edge title for Nintendo's flagship home console? Or something that I could only play on a handheld that I could barely even see? Now I've got the cart right here, so I clearly did get it eventually. Maybe someone at school traded me for it? Maybe? I don't remember, and that says something. Sonic Advance 2 is the first game in this entire series where I am unable to pinpoint when or even how exactly I first played it. But what I do remember more distinctly is watching this gameplay trailer, which was included as a bonus in Sonic Mega Collection. I mean, look at how stellar this looks, it blew me away! But a few months later, when May 25th rolled around again, I remember I was in EB Games, and I narrowed down my options between either Sonic Advance 2 or Enter the Matrix. Yeah, it was 2003, and the problem was choice. But it is easy to see why that trailer was so enticing. It still looks good today, because Sonic Advance 2 does make one heck of a first impression. And playing it now, back to back with its predecessor, it's more palpable than ever just how much the presentation has been improved between games. There's a more in-depth intro that sets the stage for the game's island setting, and a map screen between levels to give that setting more cohesion. The menus and interface are more polished and prominent. The soundtrack is so much more catchy and energetic. Level art is vibrant with detail and depth, the sprite work is more solid and animated, and finally, we have unique sprites to diversify spinning and jumping. I don't know why I said finally like that was some kind of a triumph. Like, oh boy, the ball sprites are different. Sonic Advance 1 played it safe, basing most of its stages on tropes that had been done before in 16-bit. But Sonic Advance 2 pushes into inventive territory the series had never seen before. Music Plant deserves particular praise for mining so much detail and depth out of its concept. Abstraction seems to be the thematic through-line of the visual design, from the geometric scenery in the background of Leaf Forest to the eccentric shapes and colors that make up the terrain of Sky Canyon. This means that even the more well-worn level tropes have a lot more originality, and it helps make fresh concepts like Techno Bass even more memorable. But to really drive home just how much of a visual upgrade Advance 2 is over its predecessor, let's compare two stages that follow the same concept. Ice Mountain from the first game is a perfectly serviceable level, if a little uninspired. It does its job, but it is kind of just a knockoff of Ice Cap. But in Sonic Advance 2, we get Ice Paradise. Not only is this more visually charming, it blends the familiar elements of a snow level into the backdrop of an urban cityscape. With a slate of creative levels that outnumber its predecessor, a brand new 5th playable character alongside the entire cast from the first game, and a confident, committed effort to polish up Advance 1's rough edges, it looks from a first impression like Sonic Advance 2 nails the formula for exactly what a video game sequel should be. Unfortunately, first impressions are not always what they seem. One of those rough edges that was sometimes leveled against Advance 1 was that it wasn't quite as speedy or spectacular as the games that had inspired it. Some people even derided it for being a bit slow for a Sonic game. And while I thought that made a certain amount of sense for a handheld system with a bad screen, the team at Dimp seems to have taken this criticism very much to heart, because holy crap, this game is fast! And a whole lot of things had to be changed to accommodate that speed. Launchers and dash rings are adapted from the 3D games, grind rails rise up out of existing terrain instead of being something you'll need to jump into, springs even auto-launch you when you run into them from the side. But the most innovative new mechanic is the origin of what would eventually become one of the series' most divisive ideas. Boost mode. Maintain speed for long enough, and the character will break the sound barrier, complete with an awesome aesthetic flourish, a unique running animation, and after images. You can achieve a dramatically increased top speed here, but there is a good amount of leeway once you get into it. You have to slow down significantly to lose that boost, so it definitely feels and looks spectacular. And the more rings you have, the faster you'll break into boost mode, which could potentially incentivize and reward skilled play like never before. Potentially. Give me a minute. Even the way stages begin and end is changed, with a running countdown at the start and a checkered finish line that gives you bonus points depending on how fast you crossed it. And tellingly, all of the reverential references that Advance 1 made to the classic series are gone. No more end-of-level signpost, no animal capsules, no remixes of retro music, even Sonic's iconic whirly feet running animation is out. There are exactly 2 small pools in Zone 1 Act 1, and that is the only time you will ever see water in the entire game. Heck, even one of the series' most well-known elements, the idle animation, is conspicuous by its absence. But it makes sense, because Sonic Advance 2 is a game that never expects you to stand still. Despite the criticisms the first game faced at the time, Advance 2 is not trying to be fast in the way the Genesis classics were fast. In fact, this game is no longer trying to recreate Sonic's old-school design principles at all. No, the gameplay it's trying so desperately to replicate is this. It wants to be Sonic Adventure 2's speed stages. And the problem with making SA2 more like SA2 really should have been more obvious. The reason that Sonic Adventure 2 could do what it did was because it was in 3D. From this perspective, the player can see ahead into the distance, and Sonic's superpower can be so much more breathtaking. With that in mind, it made sense to refocus the game around spectacle platforming, which could be realized through skillful, snappy reactions across mostly linear layouts. However, and this is important, there is no technical reason the 16-bit series couldn't have been designed this way. As seen in quite a number of fan-made ROM hacks over the years, the Genesis would have been more than capable of a 2D spectacle platformer. So let's answer a question that apparently nobody involved in Sonic Advance 2's development ever asked themselves. If the Genesis games could have been faster, speedier, and more spectacular, why weren't they? In a side-scroller, the camera perspective is going to be limited, so the stage layouts in the classics had to be carefully designed so that most of the time, momentum was something that a player cultivated and maintained through their own skill. You didn't just go fast for the sake of it, you used Sonic's abilities in tandem with the physics and terrain to weave the character through the geometry of the zone. Speed for speed's sake would be completely missing the point. It could not be something that was just handed to you on a consistent basis. Because if hypothetically speed was something that you were just constantly given in a 2D Sonic game, if the whole goal of 2D Sonic was to make the player feel like Sonic instead of pushing them to be good at Sonic, then unless a developer was extremely careful, they may well end up with a game where the speedy spectacle would wear out its welcome through constant repetition, where the only means they'd have to present a challenge would be obstacles the player couldn't have time to react to. They might make a game where every single level, regardless of what it looked like, would feel like a racetrack suspended over a bottomless pit. Alright, let's back up and compare those snow levels one more time, but instead of looking at the visual design, I want to compare the level design. In Advance 1, we start with a sheer speedy cliff, but then the terrain branches outward. You've got 3 or 4 different paths weaving in and out of each other through the middle of the stage. Each one features its own unique set of obstacles and hazards. We see sparse but speedy platforming up high, and a slower but simpler water section below. Alright, now, here's Sonic Advance 2's map. Now certainly this level is much longer, after all the characters move a lot faster through it. But notice that while the path may split, the same sort of obstacles show up no matter where you are. It's just a matter of which loop you'll go through, which ramp you'll launch off of, and which slide you'll plummet down. No matter where you are in this map, you're always looking at the same stuff. And notice how the entire layout starts high and moves on a downward slope. Again, that's so it's easy to maintain a ton of speed as you move from one end to the other. And let's be fair, 2D Sonic always had some levels that were speedier than others. That's kinda just a matter of good pacing. One zone in this game being a downhill jam would have been a blast, and it would have even made a lot of sense for this one to mimic the layout of a ski resort. But now let's compare Ice Paradise to Hot Crater, or Techno Base, or Music Plant. Are you seeing the issue here? Because the whole point of the game design is centered around making you feel speed instead of earn speed, Every zone has been turned into a downhill jam. I guess one exception to this is Sky Canyon, but all it's really doing is flipping the formula and flinging you uphill with boosters instead. Oh, and every stage is also just lousy with constant rail grinding, which, especially on a 2D plane, is just gonna make them feel even more samey. Again, a single stage built around grinding would be a cool trick, but when you build every stage around the same elements, it just becomes tedious. Now, this lack of variety in level design has always been the #1 criticism of Sonic Advance 2. In fact, I think this game's release was the first time I'd ever heard anybody utter the phrase, "hold right to win." And yeah, I see where it comes from. While blasting around with unprecedented speed starts out as a really impressive feat, seeing the same sort of thing through each and every zone turns spectacle into tedium. But hold right to win isn't really a fair criticism. That's oversimplifying it. These zones do still feature their own creative gimmicks and enemies and hazards. The problem is how little those elements actually impact such frenzy-focused levels. For one thing, a lot of them just end up being slightly different ways to go fast, and the ones that aren't just feel like such disruptive pace breakers. Like you're being punished for failing to avoid something unique about the level. And with such similar layouts, the only way the game can become more challenging or even different as it goes on is to place more stuff in your way. In the classic games, as long as you were being careful, the layout wouldn't often force you into unfair situations. And even when it did stab you with a difficulty spike, it would be something distinctive enough that you'd remember it on a replay. But in Sonic Advance 2, you can't be careful. Not just because you're always moving so much faster, but because all the level chunks feel the same. And it's much harder to build familiarity with the layouts as a result. Like, I'm pretty gosh darn okay at Sonic games, but I slammed headlong into this Badnik in Egg Utopia each and every time I played it. But hazards like this are only part of the problem. After all, Advance 2 is usually too preoccupied with making sure you're careening downhill like a runaway freight train to worry about silly things like enemies anyway. So the only other option the game has for building difficulty is by using the immense verticality of its layouts to place blind jumps and ramps over what may or may not be bottomless pits. This starts becoming a problem as early as the 3rd level, and is a downright constant by the end. I mean, you can tell how sloppy the level design is just by how long it takes you to fall before you actually die. And how about these boss fights? It's yet another indication of the game's unending commitment to running all the time! Aside from the last boss in the game, every single one of these is an endless chase. I'm actually gonna give the game some credit here. I think the boss fights do a pretty nice job mining all the creativity and variety they could from the concept. Special mention has to go to the Egg Utopia boss, where Eggman swaps between the floor and ceiling, and you can flip your own gravity at will. That's really neat. Even if the bosses are a little easy when you can just hang back and grab more rings, they're still usually a lot of fun. I say usually because of this thing, where this mechanical hand can sometimes, inconsistently, kill you in one hit even if you have rings. This goes so completely against every facet of Sonic's design that it almost single-handedly ruins the whole concept. In yet another break from tradition, Sonic is the only character available at the start, and everyone else is unlocked as you play through the first couple of stages. But hey, more characters is an awesome reward for playing, and I especially love these animations for the characters you rescue. You also get little inter-level cutscenes and, oh my god. Are you guys seeing this? Sonic's eyes are not green! Oh, the prodigal son has returned! The franchise is saved! Anyway, it's still cool that they're here, but Advance 2 sorta winds up missing the whole point of having multiple characters. Those two little pools of water mean that the potential of Knuckles swimming goes completely unexplored. I mean, not that there'd be any reason to, but he can't even do it anymore. And while you still can fly and glide and climb, there's not much incentive to actually do any of that when every stage is so singularly focused on unyieldingly pushing you forward at all times. So the only real difference I notice between characters is their individual mid-air dashes, and that is at least a well-done mechanic. Hey, the R button finally does something. But it's just not enough. In the first game, I often found myself scanning through alternate routes depending on who I was playing as, but when every path feels the same, every character feels the same. I was just screaming right past every potential fork in the road, and thanks to the preponderance of rails and boosters and spike traps that'll drop you 45 stories, backtracking is both difficult and unnatural. And yet that raises a bizarre contradiction. For being a title so very focused on going fast, this. This is the Sonic game where to get into the special stage, you'll need to collect 7 special rings in one single playthrough of a level. No, you can't collect them over multiple playthroughs. No, you can't even select the special stage from the menu once you get them all. You'll just need to painstakingly chart a course through every one of these enormous, confounding 2D racetracks that'll ensure you collect every last one of these rings so that you have one single shot at a Chaos Emerald. And if you fail, your only recourse is to go back and do it again. No wonder I'd never even seen the inside of the special stage until now. I guess the mode itself is a marked improvement on the first game, though that's not a high bar to cross. Although navigating a 3D plane with a D-pad really made my thumb ache. But once again, of course, the developers have chosen to constrain Supersonic to just one extra level. Fortunately, getting all the emeralds for each character now unlocks other stuff. Unfortunately, it's literally all stuff that the last game gave you up front, like the sound test. Or the tiny Chow Garden. Or Amy Rose. And wait, no, that's actually a lot better. But even then, her playstyle was so much more unique in the last game. Now she plays a lot like everyone else does, because she has to. There's no way Advance 1 Amy can make it through these stages. Last but not least, we've got a new character, Cream the Rabbit. She's accompanied by Cheese the Chow, who's just expertly engineered to be adorable, especially the way he mimics Cream's movements. Cream and Cheese, I do love a good name pun. And that name is appropriate, because this Chow lets you completely cheese the entire game. See, Dr. Mad? I told you I'd remember. Cream can order her invulnerable companion to take out enemies automatically, and as if that's not OP enough, she can also fly like Tails. And just like Tails, it's a great detail how her mode of aviation just inexplicably hangs off her jump sprite. Cream is an early example of something that's become a bit of a trend for old school platformers. A character that acts as an obvious easy mode. She functions really well on that level, and her power set means she's still a really enjoyable way to play the game for more experienced players as well. Funky Kong must have been taking notes. This is a game with a stellar presentation, gorgeous 2D sprite work, distinctive visuals, creative locales, and an apt, memorable soundtrack. Unfortunately, all of those positives have gone unappreciated, because Sonic Advance 2 is a game that sacrifices entirely too much of its substance in pursuit of that spectacle. And for those too young to remember, we saw a community first when this game was released. The majority of the old school Sonic fans, who at the time made up basically the entire online fan base, hated this game when it came out. Not just because it was a mediocre game in its own right, but more because Advance 2 was the first time a 2D Sonic game wasn't even trying to be this. Dimps tampered with the formula that made Sonic an icon, and in the eyes of a lot of Sonic fans, even trying that was blasphemy. But to take that step, only to end up with a game that fell flat in all the ways that mattered, was practically unforgivable. Nonetheless, in spite of all I've said here, what can I say? I still didn't hate it. I'm not saying for a second that it's some kind of underrated gem, because it's not, but it does have a few redeeming qualities. Yeah, maybe the layouts are frustrating and repetitive, and maybe the constant speed does wear out its welcome just a few levels in. But for those first 2 or 3 stages, Sonic Advance 2 is one of the most strikingly impressive games on the platform. I guess it helps that I've never been one of those people who believes that Sonic, even in 2D, always has to be just like this to be any good. After all, some of my favorite games in the series are the ones that are more speed-focused. I definitely don't enjoy Advance 2 anywhere near as much as its predecessor, but I will at least give it credit for trying something different. Sonic Advance 2 has a few good ideas, and fortunately, Dimps would work out a few of those kinks over the years, and with time, they did make a speed-focused 2D Sonic game that, at least for my money, nailed the execution a whole lot better than this. But next week, it's time to conclude this trilogy with a game that, believe it or not, I had never even come close to finishing before, Sonic Advance 3. And you can see that episode right now for a $1 donation on Patreon. Also, as of right now, there's only 1 week left to hit this season's milestone goals for Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 1 Genesis. There's also other perks like a Discord server, and if you want to become a fashion icon and wear the Geek Critique, you can inexplicably do that too. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, you keep geeking, I'll keep critiquing.